Hello, everyone, and welcome to Lamplighter. Today we have with us our guest, Sharon Milliman. Sharon had 4 NDEs and many spiritually transformative experiences. These include meeting Jesus Christ, unmet family members, and learning about the role of suffering in our spiritual development. From my interactions with Sharon, she exudes a spirit of humility and kindness. Sharon, I know these kinds of experiences can be difficult to put into words, but to the best of your ability, could you share with us your 4 near-death experiences and anything else you'd like to share?
Okay, well, thank you for having me, first of all. It's an honor. And I have had 4 near-death experiences. And the first one happened when I was 13. I was taking swimming lessons at the Y here in the town that I live in. And the instructor wanted me to dive headfirst into the pool, and I just couldn't do it. I mean, we're at 10 feet of water. And there was just something in me that was saying, no, 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 don't do this. I watched as all the other kids went in and they came out and they were fine. But when it came to me, I just could not do it. And so my instructor said, well, you will do this dive or I will throw you in. And he no sooner said that than he put his hands around my waist, picked me up, and tossed me into the 10-foot section of the pool. And I panicked and I took in a ton of water and I just sunk to the bottom. I mean, and that's when my spirit left my body. And I was kind of hovering over top of my body. So I could see and hear everything that was going on around the outside of the pool. Even though I was under 10 feet of water, it was like I was sitting there hearing it all. I saw my mom, who was on the opposite side. She was leaning over the banister. It was a balcony where the parents could sit and watch their children. And my mom she was leaning over and she was screaming. And there was another lifeguard, and she was taking care of the, 2 and 3 year olds, 4 year olds, and they were in 3 foot section of the pool. And I heard her say, Bob, go in and get her. And he was just so I mean, my sight would go from here to here to here to here. So I don't know how that all worked, but that's what happened. And I looked, he came into my view and he was just ashen. His face was just ashen and his eyes were as big as saucers and he couldn't move. And then the next thing I know, there is someone from the other side of the pool, like in the 5 foot section, 6 foot section, but opposite where I was. And um, he had jumped in and got me and did CPR. People got me out, helped him get me out of the water, and he was getting me to breathe again. And then but I had heard a metal door slam. It was like bam, and it echoed. And that's when my spirit just went right back into my body. Now, while I was under the water, there was this light. It was like a beautiful, round, white light. It was very brilliant, but it didn't hurt my eyes. And it just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And all I could feel coming from that light was just deep, deep love. And the light was so beautiful. Excuse me. I'm sorry. The light was really beautiful. It was very soft on my eyes, and yet just it just was so brilliant. And it was white, but I didn't feel any fear. I didn't feel any pain. I didn't feel anything except I felt very comfortable and very cocooned, sheltered, loved. It was incredible. Um, I don't After it happened, my mom was in such shock over it. We never really talked about what had happened, what I saw. Um, and I had never heard of NDEs at that time, you know. So that was my first experience. Um, my second experience, I was talking on a cordless phone. I was about 43 at the time, and I was sitting out back, and not on a cell phone. We didn't have cell phones back then, but it was just like a cordless phone. And I was talking to a friend of mine, and all of a sudden there was this. It started to rain, and I heard this thunder. And then, as soon as I heard that thunder, I hear this loud crack right next to me, and the lightning had hit my arm, my right arm, and then it traveled underneath the house and blew out the transformer that was in front of our house. So I mean, not I'm sitting there and I have this agonizing, horrific, horrible pain in my arm, and it's going across my chest. And then the next, I mean, it was just like 1 minute I was in my body, and the next minute I was out of my body. It was like peeling a banana. I just peeled myself right up out of my body. And there I am laying on the ground, and I had no connection at all with the body that was laying on the ground. And I had, at that particular moment, I had no idea. I knew I was hit by lightning, but I didn't know I was dead. And so I give a brief look at the woman laying there, and then I start going up the back steps into my kitchen. And when I went in there, it had a strange golden color to it. Everything had this golden color, even the air. It was very odd. And I looked at the curtains above my sink, and they were not my curtains. So I went into the dining room, and I noticed, okay, I know how to get around in this house. This is my house, but this stuff that's in here is not mine. The dining room furniture was not mine. Then I went into the living room, and it was the same thing. It wasn't my stuff. And then I heard what sounded like an old time radio show playing, which was odd because we didn't even have a radio in the house. But it sounded like something from back in the Waltons, 20s or 30s. And when I started to panic at that point because I nobody was in the house, which was not normal, and none of the stuff in it was mine. So I couldn't figure out what was going on, and I started to panic. And at that point, this huge loving presence came, and it was a formless presence, but the love that this presence exuded was just beyond words. I mean, it was just like that light that I saw when I was 13. And this presence, that love, and it's the presence itself, which just wrapped me up, just completely wrapped me up. There was no pain, no fear, no worry, nothing. I was like, okay, you know, and it was almost like this presence had a male. He was male as far as I could sense. He had a male presence about him or whatever. Um, Although he was not, he didn't, I couldn't see him. I could feel, is what I'm trying to say. Um, so anyway, he kind of picked me up, and we did not go up or down. We went sideways. Um, and we were moving very rapidly through these pink and gold clouds. And when we got to the end of the clouds, there was a garden. And it was the most beautiful garden. I mean, if you could take the most perfect spring day, the humidity was perfect, the it, 70, 75 degrees, you know, a soft breeze, um, sky is blue. And that's what it was like. Multiply all that by 10 bazillion, and then that's what you feel. It's Excuse me.
So actually, I have a couple of thoughts and questions, if that's okay, if I just
Sure.
interject for a second. So it's really interesting. You mentioned that the room you were in, uh, it was a room in your house, but it was different, right?
Hmm.
Yeah, and so I've heard a lot of like out of body reports like that, where I mean sometimes it's an actual place that it's just the spiritual dimension of wherever they're at. But sometimes it's actually like I don't know how to explain, but like they'll be in their house, but they'll do things on a spiritual level, like with the spirit of their house, like open a spirit door and these types of things, and have a spirit. It's like there's a separate spirit house,
Oh,
and that they are interacting with, and it's a little bit different. And or they'll go to like a restaurant or something, and which is a funny thing that you don't imagine the spirit to be doing. But it's a spirit restaurant, and these are just different kinds of out of body reports, not so much NDEs, but it's just interesting that those kind of things can happen. And I don't really know how all that works yet. I have never really figured it out, but it seems like there's, you know, the actual physical place you can be in and then be a spirit floating around there. And then, but there's also like a parallel dimension of
uh-huh.
spirit where there's another your house or something that's a little different. Yeah.
It I never could figure it out until one day when I was at an Ions. I was the speaker at Ions, and somebody in the back of the room said, "Well, that was a house you were in when your past life, and that's how you knew
So,
how to get around." I'm like, "What?"
uh,
I,
yeah, I don't think you can assume that.
I never, you know, it's that subject has come to me more times than I care to think about because I don't want to come back here again. But I never learned about that. I knew nothing about that. And so when that person, I was just new into this NDE thing, and I was
Yeah.
giving the talk. And when he mentioned that, he said, or maybe the lightning was so strong that it catapulted you back in time for a couple minutes and then God came and got you. I said, well, okay, whatever it was, I don't want to go through that again because I was afraid. I didn't know, I didn't understand. It all happened so quick that I couldn't process, in my mind, okay, this isn't normal. Something's going on here. What is it?
Yeah.
So when you talk about parallel, I
Parallel
don't know.
dimensions, spiritual dimension of the place and then there's the actual place. Yeah.
Right now
Or
that
physical
I
place.
I I can buy. I can,
Yeah.
I
See,
can
yeah, I
get
think
that.
that probably would explain it. That's because that lines up with a lot of these out of body things that I've heard. And that I think that would make sense. So, but also though, it's interesting when you're describing this garden. I've heard this garden like description before, and I always try to picture it. And I know it's impossible because it probably did it have colors there that you don't see
Oh
here?
my gosh, the colors were so beautiful. And when you're there, your senses are so heightened. You become so aware of everything. I mean, it was like I could see 360 degrees without turning my head. I knew
Hmm.
what was going on back here. I knew what was going on over here. But the colors, I mean, it was Oh, they were so vibrant. They were so bright and brilliant and beautiful. And it was as if the the colors themselves were singing, It was, and there were colors that I had no word for. I didn't know what color that was. Of course, I'm not an artist, so I'm sure you can take different colors of paint and make a color that you've never heard of before. But it was the only thing I can say is God is the master artist because he can come up with the most gorgeous,
Yeah.
beautiful combinations, and it was just magnificent. I'd like to go back. um, but I could see. very far distances, very great detail. Um, and I didn't have to move. I could, and I did move around. I met my two brothers who had died when they were babies, and they were fully grown men. I would imagine about the late 20s, early 30s. And that's about the age that everybody was. And I saw a lot of people, and they all had bodies. And I thought, okay. And my brothers, we had this family reunion because he looked, and I knew they were my brothers because the second they smiled, they looked exactly like Dad. And I kept saying, "Oh my gosh, Dad would be so proud of you if he could just see you now." And I mean, we just it was a wonderful family reunion. But they were taking me around, showing me the different things, sort of a tour in heaven. And but they had to tell me that I had died because I was like a feather on the breath of God. I was so in shock and in awe of everything that I was just like, the whole time my mouth was open. And I was like, oh my gosh. It was just so magnificent. Just and the love and the acceptance. And that was huge for me because I'd spent a lifetime with people, you know, you're ugly, you're fat, you're stupid, you're this, you're that. Um, and I guess I was buying into what the world was telling me. And that was one of the reasons why um, I had to have a sit down conversation with God, which I did. So after I met my brothers and they took me around and showed me some stuff, I saw Jesus and he came over, and I mean it was almost like a reunion because I had seen him before when I was 15. He came and visited in the back of a church, and that's where four other women saw him as well. Okay, so my brothers were taking me around and they were showing me all these different buildings, and I knew what they were for, what they were used for. Um, One was a spiritual hospital. There was a building where babies and children go and they're loved and cared for. Um, there were rolling plains and hills and valleys and streams and just I mean, and there were animals there. Um, there were two houses sitting on the bluff. Um, well, one of them was sitting on the bluff, and the other one was kind of behind it a little bit. And it was made of a beautiful stone, just beautiful stone. And I saw what ocean waves crashing up onto some, rocks at the base of this bluff where this house was sitting. So I knew there was an ocean, a beach, that's awesome. But uh, a little bit behind the house, there was another house, and it was like an English cottage, and it had beautiful rose gardens in the backyard. Um, I saw a library that I call the Hall of Knowledge, and it had a bazillion books. So you could get knowledge about anything you could possibly want. If you want to know about ants, well, guess what? You can take a book out. And I don't know if it's an interacting book or if it's just a book, but it appeared to me as a book. So that meant knowledge. And while I was there, I kept getting these downloads. I call them infusions of divine knowledge, divine wisdom. And then, as we were going through the garden, my with my two brothers, um, I saw Jesus come out of a grove of trees, and he walked up to me. And when he did that, my brothers disappeared. I didn't know where they went, but I didn't care. I just had eyes for Jesus, and it didn't bother me that they took off. Um, so then he walked me over to a wooded glen that was just magnificent. Um, it was as if we were in the woods, which we were, but I could see the sunbeams coming through the tall pine trees. And there were pine cones and pine needles and little blue flowers popping up here and there. And there was a log that was laying down. And I sat on the log, and there was a man on the other end of the log. And I knew that man was God. And we had a very, very deep conversation, a very beautiful conversation. And after the conversation was over, basically his message to me was, don't listen to the world. I had been listening to the world, and it was bringing me down. And he's like, no, I don't make mistakes. I don't make junk. Don't listen to the world. Listen to me. And um, at that point, I learned who God really was, because I'd never really thought God's this old man in the up in the sky with a black book that keeps track of everything we've ever done, right or wrong. And when I met this being that I knew was God, I realized that God is a spirit, and he doesn't have a shape or form. He's not male, he's not female, although he can take on those characteristics if he chooses to. If he has a message to give you, if he wants to talk to you. Now, he did it back in the biblical days with Moses, but he appeared as a burning bush. And I've told people before, if he appeared to me as a burning bush after I just got struck by lightning, I'd take off and run as fast as I could go. There would be no conversation. So
Yeah,
he knew. I mean, he knows each one of us so intimately. He created us. He knows us. He knew how to appear in order for me to feel comfortable.
yeah. You know
And
what you're saying, sorry if I can
mm,
interject.
sure.
What you're saying resonates so much with me because I've heard a lot of stories, a lot of NDEs now where they'll meet Jesus or God, and he is described a little differently from one account to another. But the thing is that I've also discovered that spirits can appear differently if they want to.
Hmm.
I mean, and after we die, when we immediately die, we look like what we did just 2 seconds ago. But once we've crossed over, we can look like 30 years old or whatever. And what about like people with, I don't know, different kind of physical maladies? What if I don't know, wouldn't they just remove those, different,
Hmm.
and so I would think that that's not a limitation, and to imagine that God is limited to one appearance seems a little silly to me since he's God.
Yeah,
Yeah,
he will come to you in a way that you can understand, in a
yeah,
way that will help you to open up and for there to be a communication between the two of you.
right.
And he is limitless. He's so huge, so big. If you need a mother figure at a certain time in your life when you're really having a rough time, he could come to you as a woman. If you need a father figure, he'll come to you as a man. If you're a young person and you need another young person, he can come to you as that. I mean, it's just he's bigger than any of these little teeny boxes that we people seem to put him in. Well, the Bible says this and this and this, and you're not talking biblically. And it's like, but I am, because who Jesus did what he always did. He leads you to the Father. Okay, so I'm sitting there with a fatherly figure talking, and he literally saved my life, you know? And but if he'd have showed up as anything other than the way he did, there wouldn't have been much of a talk, because it was just, my life had been so awful up until that point. But he has a tendency, he's so compassionate, so strong and yet gentle. Um, and the love that poured out of every cell in his body. And I've been asked before, well, you can't see the face of God, or burst into flame and die. That did not happen because I was already dead. And so
Yeah, I think there's a lot of lack of understanding of certain scriptures. Like there are also scriptures that talk about seeing God. Can't think off the top of my head. Maybe I'll put it in the description below. But um, so you know, it's I try to look at the Bible through the lens of the NDEs rather than just assume I know what the Bible means and then judge the NDEs based on the Bible. You know,
right,
because it's an ancient record. It's got been translated 100 different ways. It's and so but you know, I'm very cognizant of the of how these things compare with Scripture, but I don't assume that I can understand all of the words in Scripture exactly right the first time.
that's exactly right. I and the bottom line is NDEs are a God thing. They are not, he's the one who picks and chooses who's going to have one and when. It's that's my personal outlook on it. And where these might be our experiences, it's all God's story. So I was told to share my story so that people could see what kind of God we have, and that he's not a mean, nasty guy sitting up in the corner of the sky with a black buck. That's not who he is. There's reasons for everything that happens to us in our life. And we may not know what those reasons are at that particular moment, but how do we know that 10 or 20 years later, that lesson's going to be put in your face and you're going to say, aha, that's why this happened, you know? So I, I, I just look at it that it's, he has the perfect picture. He can see all of it. We can't. We can only see bits and pieces of it. And so it's we do tend to put our own spin on things, well, God did it this way because, or he couldn't do it this way because this book says he can't. Um, I just, I honor and respect the Bible, but I also know that I don't understand all of it, you know.
Yeah, I
So,
think that shows humility too.
so after that was my second near death experience. I had a third one. That happened in November of 2016. Um, I'm sorry, my lips are so dry.
Okay.
Um, it was, I had a emergency surgery. I had a bowel obstruction and adhesions, and I mean, I was sick, and so I had to wait like an hour to have the surgery done once I was at the hospital, and that was the longest hour of my entire life. Um, but once they got me back into surgery, um, I had aspirated on the breathing tube, and I left my body and I hovered over the surgery over the table. And it was interesting because the doctors and the nurses, and there was two or three other people, and they were all had these blue hats on. They had baby blue colored gloves on, and they had these robes or cover ups that were this powder blue color. But I could see that the red wet blood on their hands. And I was like, oh, no, I'm out of here. I didn't want to see that. So I went up and I knew it was my body, but I didn't feel anything, oh, well, okay, they're doing something to this person. And I went up to the corner of the room and it was like I was sitting in a chair up in the corner of the room. And yet I could still see what they were doing. And I was like, I really don't want to watch that. So as soon as I said that to myself, there was this round. it was like a rainbow colored whirlpool, but it was upside down. So it was going up like this instead of going down like this. And I thought, well, I'm leaving. And I went right up through that portal or whirlpool or whatever it was. And it was, it was so magnificent because I was in heaven again. This was the second time. And I recognized all the landmarks. Um, but I was in a different position, a different place. I was clear down where the what I call the glorious city was. I was standing outside of this great big huge golden wall. It was like cinder blocks, one on top of the other, huge ones, and they were all made out of pure gold. So I'm standing there and I'm thinking, I can't climb this thing. I can't jump this thing. What am I supposed to do? Well, there was a- about, I don't know, a couple feet down to my, that would be my left. There were two gates that were opened up. And I thought, oh, I'll just go down there and walk right through the gates, but I couldn't move. I went up through this sparkly rainbow colored whirlpool thing. And I ended up back in heaven again in the same place that I was in my second near death experience. Only this time I was standing next to the golden wall that surrounds the glorious city. And it was like real thick, heavy, deep, big, wide cinder blocks, one on top of the other, and then we were made of pure gold. And I tried to jump the wall. I couldn't do that. I couldn't walk through the wall. And um, it didn't dawn on me just to walk a few feet down to my left and I could go into the city because the gates were open. So I'm just standing there trying to process everything. Um, at that point, the garden was way at the end and to my left, and there was this fieldstone wall that had pink roses growing up and over it. It was in my second NDE and the third one, and it was on my right, and it was between, sort of halfway between the garden and the wall where I'm standing. Um, and I looked down and there's this little brown and white beagle puppy that was jumping at my feet. He wanted me to play with him. So I scooted down and I was petting him and rubbing his tummy, and he was just as cute as he could be. And I never had a beagle, so I didn't know what the what the beagle was there for, but I was just loving on him and he was so happy. Um, and so while all this was happening, I looked up, and of course there's this field um, between the glorious city and the garden where I was before. It was like a meadow, and it had tall grass and the most gorgeous wildflowers. Um, they were everywhere, and again, the colors were just the colors were you had no words, and I felt the love, the same kind of love, but it was a little different because I was seeing it from a different perspective. I was, I mean, I had the heightened awareness, I had the glow, everybody was glowing. um, but I, I was an observer instead of, that's how I felt. I was observing what was happening, and there was a reason behind that. There was a bunch of people that started coming out of the garden, and they were walking through the meadow and going into the city gates. I heard a lot of dishes clanging and people talking, and I hear people music, real happy, happy, joyful music, and um, it was very clear they were going to have a banquet of some sort or a party, and um, so I'm playing with this little puppy. I'm sitting on the ground, and all these people start coming out of the garden, and they're walking through the meadow, and they're going into the city gates. And there was two men that came very much into my view, and they were Middle Eastern men, and they had the white things on their head with the band, and they were in white, the white robes. Um, and the two of them were they must have been friends or siblings or something. Um, but they were talking to each other and laughing. And I noticed that all the people had an angel behind them. And the angels were taller and more illuminated than the people were. And it seemed like each one, I mean, everybody had their own angel, but the angels, they all looked very similar. Um, they took on a male appearance, and they were wearing the white robe with a sash that kind of goes across this way. Um, but they all seemed to look very similar to each other. And so the two Middle Eastern men, they went into the gate, right on into the gates. There was a man, he looked like he was a construction worker. He still had his hard hat on and a tool vest that he put his tools down in. And he walked past me, and I smiled at him. He smiled back, so there was interaction there. Um, then two other people came into my view. I mean, right into my face. The younger of the two, um, he had died years ago, and I had seen pictures. His mother would show pictures of him, and so I recognized him because of the pictures. And then he was escorting an older gentleman, and when I got back to my room, they went into the city gates together, and they were laughing and talking, and everybody was happy. It was just incredible. But once I got into, um, when I woke up from recovery, I guess I went back into my body. I'm in recovery, and this thing is on my face, and it's helping me to breathe. And there was a doctor in the room. Um, he was actually the anesthesiologist that was standing in the room at the foot of my bed, and then it was a male nurse. I'm assuming he was a nurse. I don't know. Could have been another doctor. I don't know. But they took that thing off my face, and I looked at the anesthesiologist, and I said, "Could I have been dreaming?" He said, "Well, what do you mean?" I said, "I've been in heaven. I went to heaven." And he was like, "No, you cannot dream when you are under general anesthesia. We took you as close to death as we can possibly take you with a concoction of medication. And then we give you a different concoction of medication to bring you back. So, no, you cannot dream. This is not a natural sleep, so you won't dream." And I told him, I said, "Well, I was in heaven." I did not tell him that I saw someone who looked just like him in heaven. I should have, but I was afraid to because he was already freaked out. He was looking through my chart when I told him that I had gone to heaven. He was just looking through the chart and he was all flustered about it. And I was just like, this is so cool. I feel that love and, that wonder. I called it the pink bubble during my second NDE. So that's what I was feeling, just such joy and love, and I did not know that I came back with double pneumonia from aspirating on the breathing tube. Um, but once woke up and got to my room, I got a message from a friend of mine who was also a friend of the mother of the younger man that I saw up there, they're over there in heaven. Her husband had died that day while I was in surgery. And I let my friend know that I knew that because I saw him and he was with this lady's son, and they went together and through the gates of the glorious city. And later that night, my daughter came to see me at the hospital, and I told her the experience, and I mentioned the little brown and white beagle puppy. And she was like, Mom, we had to call the police on this man who beat his beagle puppy to death. And so I told her, I said, well, okay, the puppy's fine. He's perfect. He's happy. You know, don't be sad about it. The puppy's okay. So I guess I'm able to tell people that our loved ones are greeted and cared for, and our puppies and cats, and you know, they go to heaven too. And so that was that one. And then the fourth one was happened in November of 2017, and I had a reaction, an adverse reaction to some seizure medication. I get seizures from the lightning strike. And basically, all that was I just stopped breathing and I left my body. And I can remember up, 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 three ups. And I felt like a helium balloon just floating around up there. And it was black. It was the void. I knew it. I had heard, for years had been on different groups and things, and they talk about the void, and it was scary. But when I was experiencing it, it wasn't scary at all. It was actually quite comforting. I needed a break, and that's how I got it. And so that's it.
Yeah, that's I've heard that about the void before, that it's actually just a warm, peaceful space. Yeah,
Mhm.
and so I wondered a lot about what that means, It's like if it's kind of an unmanifested light or an unmanifested um divine love or something, because it's in fact, I believe there was one near-death experience that talked about it as like the void before creation.
Oh, that might have been me because I've always said that it was the birth of creation. It's like the womb of creation. Your babies are in the womb, and they're growing and growing and growing, and when they're big enough, they're ready to come out of the womb and go into the world. Well, this void area. To me, it was like being back in my mother's womb. I
Hmm.
was wrapped in this black velvet blanket that I felt so comfortable and safe in. And every now and then I could see a little light coming through the holes in the blanket. And I was like, okay, those must be stars or something. And that's cool. But I just like laying here. And I was in a fetal position. And um, it, for me, it was like a waiting place. It was a resting place. And that gigantic presence that was with me during my second near death experience was with me through this. It was like he was standing there and he was holding his child, this
Hmm.
little whatever in his hands. And I remember him saying, let's not be hasty. Let's think about this. Just take time and breathe. Just rest. I've got you. I'll hold you. And as soon as he said that, it was like he was having a conversation with me. And there was another presence there, and they were having a conversation too about whether I was to stay or go. But apparently, it was my decision. And as soon as he said, just let me hold you, just you need to rest, because I was at a place in my life where I was done. And, it would have been perfectly fine with me.
Hmm.
But he didn't want me to go out that way, I guess. He had plans for me or something. And he was just like, just rest, just rest. And I did. And then bam, I'm back in my body again. And I'm like, oh, you did not just do that. Send me back again. And oh, they had the lights on in my face, and the doctor was screaming at me, and the nurses were running around, and they were sticking needles in me everywhere. And I had this thing on my face, a non-breather oxygen mask, which is what's in my medical records. And I was like, okay, can you all just go away and shut the light off? I want to go back to sleep, you know. But that's how it ended.
Yeah. Well, I just remembered, you're talking about the two brothers that had been giving you a tour earlier.
Hmm.
Um, weren't did you mention aren't they also your did they die before you had ever met
I,
them?
I was only a year old when the first one died, and 2 years old when the second one died. So I didn't know anything about, I mean, my parents did not talk about them. It was extremely painful for my mom. So it wasn't until I was much older that they discussed the fact that we had two brothers in heaven. So it was, and they looked just like dad. I mean, you could tell for sure that those two boys belonged to my dad. I mean, they had his hair color, which was darker than mine, but it has this color running through it. And their hair was curly, and my hair is usually curly. I don't work with it, but it was incredible. Their smiles, they were identical, and it was just incredible. The love that's there.
So Sharon, really appreciate you taking the time to share your experiences with us. I know they can be very difficult to put into words, and they're very sacred and personal, and beautiful experiences. Um, and I was just wondering if you could be willing to share some contact information in case anyone watching would like to reach out to you and ask about more.
Well, people can email me if you want to put it down for them. It's just my name at gmail.com.
Okay. Um,
And if they want to talk or anything, they can just let me know that, and then we can exchange numbers at that point. But I'm open to talking with anybody, really. It's just a sort of a calling, I guess, to let people know that death is really nothing to be afraid of.
thank you. Well, thanks again for sharing your experiences. It's really a privilege to interview those like you that have had these near-death experiences and share them with the world. And I just hope it will reach many who are ready to hear these things and will be blessed by them. So thank you.
And well, thank you.